The enclosure was a canvas of silence, a space meant for one, yet defined by a profound, echoing emptiness. Niv, the solitary macaque, lived a life of deliberate routine, a life devoid of the very thing primates crave: touch, company, and the comfort of the familiar. He had learned to tolerate the glass, the distant crowds, the hum of his own isolation. This sanctuary was meant to protect him, but it also imprisoned the need for connection. Then, the silence was broken not by another primate, but by the smallest, most unlikely of visitors. How does an animal, programmed for deep social bonds yet forced into singularity, react when a tiny, defenseless creature stumbles into his world? Now, let's enter their world, if you're already enjoying this story. A quick like and share makes all the difference. Let us know in the comments where you're listening from today. The world Niv inhabited was geometrically precise: stone walls, climbing ropes, and a carefully managed ecosystem designed for his well-being, but not for his heart. He was a Japanese macaque, a species wired for the complexity of the troop, where every touch, every glance, every moment is a piece of a vast, interlocking social puzzle. In the wild, he would have known the constant reassurance of his kind, the grooming, the playful wrestling, the deep shared warmth against the winter snow. Instead, his days were a measured, predictable loop. He ate, he climbed, and he stared. The greatest burden of a highly intelligent social animal in isolation is the profound capacity for yearning. The caretakers saw a healthy, calm monkey. They recorded the facts: weight stable, appetite normal, no overt signs of distress. But they were looking for symptoms of physical decline, not the slow, quiet atrophy of the soul. Niv's isolation was a wound that never quite closed, a silent cry echoing off the enclosure walls. His focus became fixed on the external world, observing the distant human activities, the movement of clouds, anything to fill the void. His eyes held a stillness that was both unsettling and deeply moving. It was into this meticulously ordered, profoundly quiet world that the chaos of nature introduced a feathered intruder. A small, common chicken, likely a runaway from a nearby farm or an oversight from a feeder delivery, had somehow navigated the perimeter fence. It was a creature of the barnyard, utterly out of place, utterly vulnerable. The chicken, scruffy and timid, was a flicker of organic movement against the dull backdrop of the winter enclosure. It pecked tentatively at the ground, its body language a study in high alert. Niv watched from his perch, unmoving. He had seen birds before, but they were momentary. A flutter, a shadow, then gone. This one stayed. This one was utterly unaware of the invisible yet powerful rules of the space it had entered. The macaque, whose ancestors would have seen the bird as nothing more than a passing curiosity or a small meal, felt something stir. A pull of instinct that was older than his species, a primal recognition of vulnerability. The moment was a quiet confrontation between the order of the zoo and the unpredictability of life. Niv descended slowly, deliberately, his movements stripped of the frantic energy of a monkey. He approached not with curiosity, but with a cautious, measured reverence. His world was about to change, shattered not by a great event, but by the nervous flutter of a tiny, terrified creature. The chicken, driven by a primal need for shelter as the afternoon grew cold, huddled near a rock formation, its small body shivering. Niv moved closer, not threateningly, but with a palpable, careful slowness. His eyes, usually fixed on the horizon, were now focused entirely on the small bird. The chicken flinched, expecting the natural order of things, to be chased or worse. But Niv did not strike. He did not even approach to investigate the bird with his hands. Instead, the macaque performed a gesture that transcended his species. He walked to the protected sleeping den, a small covered area built to retain warmth, and then he returned. He approached the chicken, not from the front, but from the side, and then gently began to herd it. His intent was unmistakable, communicated not through sound, but through the calm, patient geometry of his movement. He nudged the terrified bird toward the warm shelter. The chicken, exhausted and cold, finally submitted to the non-aggression, a tiny piece of wild instinct giving way to an overwhelming gentle force. This was the moment the cage transformed. It ceased being a prison of isolation and became a canvas for an impossible act of generosity. Niv settled near the entrance, creating a living windbreak, allowing the chicken to find warmth inside, protected by the very creature who should have been its predator. The relationship that unfolded in the small artificial world of the enclosure defied both ethology and expectation. It was built not on shared history or mutual benefit, but on a simple, profound exchange: protection for presence. The chicken, whom staff soon informally named Pip, became a fixture. It learned Niv's patterns, the slow pace of his morning climb, the predictable location of his afternoon sunbath. And Niv, in turn, adjusted his life around the tiny, fluttering heartbeat of his new companion. The macaque, whose species uses complex facial expressions and vocalizations to navigate the politics of a group, had no shared language with Pip. Communication was reduced to its purest form: proxemics and gentle touch. Niv would sit with his back to the wind, creating a microclimate of calm, and Pip would settle in the space between the monkey's legs or tuck itself directly under the thick, protective fur of Niv's thigh. It was an image that was visually and emotionally jarring: the primate, the apex social being of the enclosure, using his body not for dominance, but as a living, breathing blanket for a creature he could crush in a moment. The bond deepened in the quiet rituals of the day. When the feeders arrived, Niv would often push aside the choicest pieces of fruit and seeds, not to share directly, but to create a small, accessible pile for Pip. He would maintain a protective perimeter while the chicken ate, a silent guard ensuring that no sudden movement from the outside world would startle his ward. Staff observers noted that Niv's previously listless demeanor began to shift. He was still quiet, but the stillness now carried a different quality: a watchfulness, an attentiveness that was driven by an external responsibility, not internal despair. The greatest change was in the macaque's use of space. Before Pip, Niv's territory was a solitary circuit, traveled with indifference. Now, the enclosure had a focal point: the chicken's preferred spots. Niv's presence became tethered to Pip's location. If the chicken ventured too far into the open, Niv would follow, his body language signaling a subtle, almost paternal anxiety, until Pip settled again beneath a sheltering ledge or back into the circle of Niv's warmth. This was not a friendship born of play. Macaques are high-energy, tactile creatures that thrive on constant interaction. Their bond was born of mutual need in a place of isolation. Pip needed warmth and safety from a world it didn't understand, and Niv needed a purpose, an unconditional receiver of his innate, powerful capacity to care. In giving shelter to Pip, Niv was, perhaps for the first time in his isolated life, giving shelter to himself, reaffirming the deep-seated primal need for connection that his human-made sanctuary had inadvertently denied him. The chicken had given Niv a silent, unwavering passenger to share the journey of his solitude. The true test of their strange alliance arrived with the changing seasons. The sanctuary was located in a region that experienced sharp, sudden shifts in temperature, and the enclosure, while structurally sound, was open to the biting chill of the advancing winter. The staff knew the risk. A tiny domestic fowl like Pip was not equipped to handle a prolonged freeze. Their primary concern shifted from how to remove the chicken without stressing Niv to how long the macaque could actually keep it alive. The relationship, initially a curiosity, now became a focal point of genuine concern. They observed Niv on the coldest nights. He did not retreat entirely into the heated interior of his sleeping quarters, the way any sensible primate would. Instead, he would position himself strategically at the mouth of the shelter or beneath the largest, most insulating rock overhang. His mission was now one of physical sacrifice, prioritizing the thermal well-being of the chicken over his own maximal comfort. He had evolved into a voluntary guardian against the elements. There were moments of genuine, heartbreaking struggle. On one particularly icy morning, Pip was slow to emerge, lethargic and clearly suffering from the cold. The macaque, seeing the chicken's distress, began a series of quick, agitated movements, not against Pip, but against the surrounding barriers. He would rub the chicken gently with his chin, a gesture of deep, nonverbal reassurance, then quickly retreat to forage for the most calorie-dense food. It was a non-clinical fever pitch, the anxiety of a caregiver realizing their charge is in danger. The scientific staff debated intervention. Should they separate them? Would saving the chicken destroy the first meaningful connection Niv had made in years? The risk of traumatic removal seemed too high, yet the risk of the chicken's death was imminent. They decided to augment the environment, adding extra straw bedding and placing heat lamps outside the entrance to Niv's primary dwelling, hoping the macaque would understand and utilize the resources. Niv immediately understood. He did not touch the lamps, but he deliberately constructed a nest of the new straw, pulling it piece by piece into the warm zone. He would then stand and wait, patiently, until Pip had waddled its way to the center of the warmth. This intelligent utilization of novel resources, driven entirely by the welfare of his friend, was the definitive proof that the bond was far more than idle curiosity. It was a deep cross-species commitment. The macaque and the chicken were surviving the winter together, an improbable, tender defiance against the harsh logic of nature and the cold reality of the cage. Their survival was a testament to the fact that companionship, however strange, is the most powerful armor against isolation. The winter passed, and the quiet vigil that Niv maintained for Pip became a legend whispered among the sanctuary staff. Visitors, too, would often pause, captivated by the sight of the large macaque, allowing the tiny chicken to pick through his fur for missed scraps of food, or to simply share the most desirable patch of sun. This was the crest of their story, the realization that their bond was not a temporary oddity, but a stabilizing force, a shared reality. One morning, the keeper, observing the pair, saw Niv sitting patiently while Pip preened the soft hair on his shoulder. This small act, the trusting presence of the chicken, the gentle tolerance of the macaque, was a nonverbal narrative of profound, unconditional acceptance. It became clear that Niv was not just protecting the chicken from the cold or from predators. He was protecting himself from the silent, existential threat of being utterly alone. In this unlikely partnership, Niv found his purpose, and Pip found her protection. The macaque's solitary life was suddenly infused with a daily, necessary devotion. He had someone to watch over, someone who depended on the specific geography of his body for survival, the profound potential for empathy, the core capacity for love that society often attributes solely to humans was on full display in the heart of that enclosure. The sheer vulnerability of Pip, paired with the immense physical capability of Niv, created a perfect, tender paradox. The macaque, confined by walls, found freedom in responsibility. He was no longer just a healthy animal in a controlled environment. He was a guardian, a nurturer, and a friend. The silence of his cage was finally replaced by the comfortable, reassuring rhythm of shared life. The story of Niv and the chicken Pip is not merely a heartwarming footnote in the history of a sanctuary. It is a profound, living parable about the architecture of empathy. We often assume that an animal's capacity for complex emotional investment is reserved only for its own species, or perhaps for a human caretaker. Yet here, in a sterile modern enclosure, two fundamentally different beings constructed a reciprocal relationship based on the deepest possible human needs: the need to protect and the need to be protected. Their bond serves as a mirror, reflecting our own profound and often hidden need for connection, especially in times of isolation. The macaque, in his deliberate acts of guardianship, taught us that the expression of love is not limited by classification or biological constraint. It is a fundamental, resilient force of life itself. Niv's life, previously a quiet tragedy of solitude, was redeemed by the accidental arrival of a small brown bird. The ultimate therapeutic takeaway from their story is one of affirmation, that the trauma of isolation can be healed by the simplest, most unlikely act of finding something to care for. The sanctuary, designed to house and protect, found its deepest meaning when the resident macaque decided to extend that protection outward, embracing the principle of care that defined the facility itself. Niv and Pip lived out their years together, a silent, feathered reminder that the laws of the heart often supersede the laws of the jungle. Their legacy is the quiet, unbreakable knowledge that, even in the most controlled environment, love will always find a way to manifest. The silence they shared was a language of the soul, a deep conversation carried on without words, proving that loyalty and compassion are not learned behaviors, but the very foundation of sentient existence. Their extraordinary shared solitude reminds us that the greatest sanctuaries are not built of stone and wire, but are forged in the quiet acceptance between two very different beings who chose to face the world and the passing seasons together. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If this story moved you, please consider liking and subscribing. It truly helps us bring more stories like this to light. We have a question for you. What was the single moment in this story that resonated with you the most? Let us know in the comments below. We read every single one,